of H.R. 4167, the Kari's Law of 2015. You know, Mr. Chairman, when I first heard of the tragic story of Kari Hunt, I was in disbelief. In his testimony before the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, Kari's father, Hank, shared with us the way that his daughter was killed, stabbed by her estranged husband in a Texas hotel room while their children were in the room. While that story is obviously horrifying enough, especially as a parent, my true shock came from the next part of the story. Kari's 9-year-old daughter, doing as she had been taught from an early age, had repeatedly tried to dial 911 from the hotel phone to get emergency help. Repeatedly, her little fingers pushed the buttons 911. But because the phone required another 9 to get an outside line, she was never able to reach the emergency assistance her mother so desperately needed, and she so desperately tried to access. What her grandfather, Hank Hunt, told me the next day, or told me next, will stay with me forever. He said as he sat with his granddaughter in the lobby of the police department, just hours after the death of his daughter, his granddaughter looked at him and said, "I tried 4 times, Papa, but it did not work. I tried 4 times, Papa, but it did not work." Through this tragedy, we learned the difficult truth that many multi-line telephone systems, like the kinds often found in hotels and offices and universities, require that users dial an additional digit to use an outside line, even when they're trying to call 911. Mr. Chairman, this is simply unacceptable. In the heat of the emergency, every person in America deserves the peace of mind to know that on any phone, 911 actually means 911, period. We teach our children from a very young age what to do in an emergency. Dial 911. We all hope that they'll never need to use that knowledge, but we want them to know what to do. I don't know too many parents who also teach their kids to think about dialing 9 or 8 or some other number to get an outside line. H.R. 4167, known as Kari's Law, seeks to remedy this problem. The legislation requires multi-line telephone systems to be configured so that dialing 911 directly connects to public safety. In addition, the law requires that a central point of contact for each system be notified when someone calls for emergency assistance, a provision intended to help emergency responders access buildings and actually locate the emergency caller. Now, these fixes are simple changes to the system in most cases, costing little, if any, money, and taking very little time. But apparently without a legal requirement, there's no way to guarantee that every MLTS will be configured for dialing 911 directly. Some businesses, including many hotels, have taken steps to fix this problem already, and I applaud them for doing so voluntarily. But there needs to be consistency across our great land, Mr. Chairman. If you're a traveler staying in a hotel, you shouldn't have to wonder during an emergency whether you're in one of the states or counties that have adopted Kari's Law when the time comes for emergency help. We need a federal law that provides certainty and protects emergency callers when they dial 911. I'd like to thank Representative Louie Gohmert from Texas. Mr. Gohmert brought this issue to our attention. He is the sponsor of Kari's Law, and his staff have done a terrific job working with us on this legislation. I'd also like to thank my colleague, Ranking Member Eshoo, and her staff for working closely with us to make this bill an even better one. Reflecting the way that these systems work and making sure the requirements are strong and effective, I'd also like to thank Hank Hunt for bringing this issue to our attention, for pushing for change in the face of his family's tragedy, and for coming to Washington, D.C. to share his story. I'll finish my remarks with something else that Hank said before our subcommittee, and I quote, "The inspiration for Kari's Law was a 9-year-old little girl that depended on her instruction from adults on how to handle an emergency, and those adults let her down." Mr. Chairman, let's not let her down or any other child again. I urge my colleagues to support Kari's law, and in doing so, we can take one step forward in ensuring that anyone, regardless of their age, who dials 911 will receive the emergency assistance they need. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, who will control 20 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. I rise in general support of H.R. 4167. I agree that it's important to make sure that consumers using multi-line telephone systems, or MLTSs, can directly dial 911 without having to dial additional digits first. We're talking about the multi-line phone systems that we use in large office buildings and hotels. Many of these systems require consumers to get an outside line. Most of us know that, but too many people do not realize this applies to 911 also. And if you don't dial 9 first, you can't reach emergency services. Such a requirement led to a tragedy in Texas several years ago. Kari Dunn was killed while her 9-year-old daughter tried to call for help. She did what she was taught to do in an emergency, dial 911. But because the system she was using required her to dial 9 first, she only heard silence at the other end. Building on the Herculean effort of Kari Dunn's family, we are one step closer to fixing this problem once and for all. Kari's law is an important step to making our systems work better in an emergency, but we should not delay taking the next step, and that is providing location information to first responders. These multi-line systems often fail to deliver precise location information. That means that if someone calls 911 from this very building, for instance, precious minutes would tick by as emergency personnel struggle to figure out where the call came from in the Capitol. We should act immediately to correct this problem, too, because making sure the call goes through is only helpful if public safety officials can find the caller. And that's why Democrats, Mr. Speaker, had hoped to include such a provision in H.R. 4167 during markup. We're encouraged by the commitment we received from Subcommittee Chairman Walden to work together on a separate bill to address this concern, and we hope to get this done soon. So with that commitment, I urge members to support H.R. 4167, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I would yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from Texas, who has been such an advocate for this family and for this change in law, and has been terrific to work with on this matter, Mr. Gohmert.
Recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank Chairman Greg Walden and also his staff. They've been superb to work with, and it's been refreshing to see how thorough both he and his staff have been in researching this issue. I came prepared to talk about the event and actually how it happened, but Chairman Walden did such a fantastic job that the emotion runs high at this point, and I'm very grateful for the manner in which this has been presented. I also want to thank FCC Commissioner Pai, who in the early days stepped up and made this an issue to get people's attention. But no greater thanks goes to anyone than to Kari's father, Hank Hunt. It was December of 2013 in Marshall, Texas, which is normally known for being kind and helpful city. Police respond often in 1 or 2 minutes. Kari's 9-year-old daughter has not had her name mentioned anywhere to my knowledge, and that's because this child did everything she could possibly do, everything she had been taught and trained to do. What a phenomenal, quick-thinking child that she is. But after Kari's death, I received an outpouring of comments from constituents and other Americans across the country expressing concern over the issue. Every day, this is an issue. Fortunately, every day someone does not pay the ultimate consequence of dying because it's an issue. But when we looked into this matter, multi-line telephone systems can easily be configured or reconfigured to enable callers to reach emergency personnel by dialing 911 without having to prefix at all. Most of the time, these changes can be made at no cost, and we've had programmers inform no charge once the issue was brought to their attention. Some MLTS vendors have offered to upgrade or tune up their existing phone systems for free also. Additionally, the American Hotel and Lodging Association has worked aggressively with its members across the country to swiftly ensure that their systems in place allow guests to directly dial 911 from guest rooms. Most of the American Hotel and Lodging Association's largest hotel member chains have activated 911 direct dial access at nearly all of their owned and managed properties. This bill gives 2 years for those who have not done so, and in view of the fact that this is so widely public, I anticipate people will move much, much more quickly than 2 years. It's quite refreshing when both sides of the aisle can come together on an issue that saves lives, does not cost anything from taxpayers, is not a mandate that needs funding, and clearly involves interstate commerce in the telecommunications industry. So anyone who dials 911 would reach emergency personnel even if the phone normally requires the user to dial a prefix. Many phones in hotels, offices, even schools don't reach emergency personnel when a user dials 911 in a time of need because the person failed to dial a prefix. This bill changes that for good. So I join Hank Hunt, and I thank full committee ranking member Poloni, Ms. Eshoo, and again, Chairman Walden, Chairman Alton, the staffs for the great work done here. We can avoid tragedy again, and it's just refreshing when we work together to make sure that happens. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
May I inquire? You have no additional speakers. Then I would urge my colleagues to support the bill and yield back the balance of the
Gentleman from New Jersey yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
I thank the chairman, and I would encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 4167, Kari's Law. And again, thank my colleague from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for his leadership on this issue, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle for working with us on this one. And I would encourage passage of the legislation. Yield back the balance of my time.